This is my old laptop. It's a 15-inch Digital Storm laptop from 2011. A laptop that at the time had pretty good specs. A 1080p display, a GTX 40 GPU, quad-core i7 processor, 12GB of RAM, and a 512GB hard drive. It was amazing, and I did all my 3D work and gaming on it. Unfortunately, that killed it in a year flat. Despite having enough fans to sound like a jet engine when under load, the CPU got heat damaged and started instantly shutting down if I dared make it run Lightmass or another game again. And support, even after shipping them the laptop for repair, was unable to fix it, saying the CPU itself was damaged and therefore there was nothing they could do. So I was stuck with a laptop that needed all this nonsense, just to type in Microsoft Word for more than 20 or 30 minutes. Even though I couldn't use any of its gaming horsepower, it was still a gaming laptop with all the drawbacks that came with it. From then, I would only ever really use it when there was no other option. And the whole experience did sour my view of laptops considerably. It would be 7 years before I decided to give it another go. This is the new MacBook Pro 16-inch, the laptop that convinced me laptops are a good idea again. This MacBook has pretty decent specs, even if it's not maxed out by any means. I gave it just what I expected to use in the lifespan of the machine for some light 3D work as well as photo and video editing. My goal in this was to get a laptop that I'll be happy with, not to replace my main desktop. Something to consider is that for the longest time, specs like these on Macs were hard to come by. So whenever I use software designed with Macs in mind like Final Cut Pro, I'm getting the sort of experience I would come to expect from a full desktop. As standard, all 16-inch MacBook Pros have NVMe SSDs, the best speakers I've come across on a laptop, and something that I've wanted for a very long time now, a 16:10 aspect ratio display. And that monitor is really allowed to shine through macOS's approach to color. The entire OS runs in wide gamut DCI-P3 color. On top of that, it applies color profile system-wide on a per pixel level, avoiding the entire mess of per program color profiles that Windows suffers from. Everything, even down to the icons on the dock, can only be described as a clear rendition, as if that's the way the image was always meant to be viewed, but Windows just wasn't up to the task. Just in case you need even more monitors than that, however, the MacBook is prepared. Each Thunderbolt 3 port can also function as a video out, either as DisplayPort via USB-C, or by going through an adapter to get full HDMI, DVI, or VGA support. On monitors that support it, it can even be used to charge the MacBook while it's plugged in, so you only need a single cable. The setup process is pretty simple, but when contrasted with Windows, it instantly won me over. You start out with the usual, picking your time zone, connecting to Wi-Fi, but then something rare happens. You get presented with a few options. Disable Siri dictation, disable sending any of your personal data to Apple from using Siri or search, which I might add, they're the only company that actually deletes your data after 6 months. Google. Disable analytics, disable all location services, and a nice convenient button to immediately turn on full disk encryption. And for the first time in years, I feel like I own my computer. I know, shocking in the age of Windows 10 and the impossible to turn off telemetry that re-enables itself every single time you update Windows. It was an amazing first impression and something very refreshing after Windows 10. Then you boot into the desktop and you're good to go. First thing you notice is this is probably the most comfortable trackpad ever put into a laptop. The massive size makes navigation and gestures easy and comfortable, even for somewhat precise movements. Even with the brand new Logitech MX Master 3 mouse, I didn't find myself reaching for it once my entire trip. Even when cutting together a video in Final Cut Pro, the trackpad felt natural enough that I actually preferred it to a normal mouse. The keyboard, meanwhile, isn't anything special. It's good for a laptop, feels nice and responsive to type on, but it's no mechanical keyboard. At the same time, if you want to keep this form factor, I don't really know how you can improve it. And finally, the touch bar. I like it. It does some cool stuff. I didn't think I would ever really use it, but I was wrong. In programs where it's supported, it's something that I'm really enjoying. After doing the initial setup, I knew I wanted to get Windows on this thing, mostly just to play games and mess with Unreal from time to time, and I was shocked at just how easy it is. You run the installer, tell it how big you want the partition to be, and get some coffee. When you get back in 2 minutes, you'll be looking at the Windows 10 setup screen. Once the setup is done, Boot Camp will even automatically install the video drivers and touch bar software for you. Finally, it's time to install some programs on this thing. But where to start? Well, there are two options. You can either just download programs normally, or you can use the App Store. At first, I thought the App Store was just a bad joke. There would be some mobile stuff on there and that would be it. I was wrong. It's entirely separate. As far as I can tell, there's no mobile apps on there at all. Instead, it's actually a pretty good resource for some really good software. It has DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro, Lightroom, and it can feed my Divinity Original Sin 2 addiction. As far as I know, there's not really much of a difference between getting something online versus the App Store. The main difference is that on the merchant side, legally your purchase and license is with Apple, not the developer. So they never process or handle your credit card info on their end, Apple just handles it all. But beyond that, there really isn't much difference. Getting programs online lets you save the installers forever offline if you want to do that, but I'm finding myself gravitating towards the App Store for a few things here and there. Like for Affinity Photo, if I don't want to go and manually update that whenever there's a new version, I can just let it automatically install in the background, like it would on a phone. All of Apple's software is going to be App Store exclusive, however, so if you want to use Logic or Final Cut, then you're going to need to at least give it a try. And the automatic updates for it are actually pretty decent. It'll prioritize downloading updates whenever the computer is either asleep and plugged in, just to make sure it doesn't interrupt your work. When it comes to software support, I'm overall pretty satisfied. GarageBand and iMovie are both preloaded on the system and are surprisingly competent, much better than they used to be. GarageBand and iMovie are just cut down versions of Logic Pro and Final Cut Pro, both only missing things that you would only care about if you were really deep into that kind of work. In fact, they're so similar that Apple kind of expects you to start using them before you upgrade to the paid versions. You can even open your old projects so you can pick up right where you left off. And frankly, Final Cut and Logic are both at very competitive prices. Final Cut runs at around $300 and Logic Pro is around $200. It's a lot up front, but when compared to an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, it's a no-brainer. And it's because of these tools that I was able to confidently cut out my Adobe Creative Cloud subscription finally. Between Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, Capture One, Final Cut Pro X, and GarageBand, I've managed to build up a nice collection of software to replace Adobe, and all on a perpetual license no less. For video editing, something pretty important that it has access to is the Apple ProRes codec. Much as I wish it was a thing on Windows, it's still Apple exclusive to encode those files, and anyone working with video will appreciate its inclusion as an intermediary codec. And for all this shit it got when it came out, Final Cut Pro X is actually pretty good now. I was originally trained in video editing on Final Cut Pro 7 back in the day, and after all this time I think it's finally surpassed the old version in every way. And on the new laptop, it's incredibly fast, partly thanks to Final Cut Pro using any idle CPU or GPU to pre-render everything in the background for you, making it responsive to work with and giving it a very fast export time. Meanwhile, with GarageBand, even though I hadn't used it since I was 14, just a few minutes after I plugged in my keyboard, I was already making songs in it. It has a really easy learning curve, and considering I've always wanted to get back into music, it's giving me a very good excuse now. On the software everyone's familiar with for 3D programs, I was surprised to see just how good the support actually was. Maya, Blender, ZBrush, Rhizome, Substance Painter, Designer, Marmoset, and Unreal all have native macOS builds, and they all function pretty well. The only gap was in macOS's limited OpenGL support. OpenGL will still work, but Apple is making a heavy push to convert everyone over to Metal, so things aren't necessarily running as fast as they should. I've also unfortunately found that Blender's Cycles rendering engine doesn't support GPU rendering on macOS anymore, since Blender just doesn't have enough Mac developers to dedicate to it. It's unfortunate, but Radeon Pro Render filled that void pretty easily. Or if I wanted to use Cycles, I could just stick to CPU rendering or dual boot into Windows. It's not the end of the world. macOS pushing so hard for Metal to be the main API everything uses has mixed results. The programs that do use Metal are incredibly fast, even with macOS itself using it now for the entire UI. From everything I've found online, it rivals Vulkan in speed. The drawback is that things that rely on OpenGL are suffering a little right now. It feels like it's still in the middle of a transitionary period, but from what I've seen, the future with Metal seems promising. But I'm a 3D artist. I don't need just software to get my job done, but a tablet. And you know what the worst part about a tablet is? Windows Ink. On more than one occasion, Windows updates have entirely broken my ability to get any work done with it. Plus, to make matters worse, it always seems like you're fighting the tablet software. You want to make a straight line? Too bad. We think you really want to right-click right now. You want to use pen pressure? I hope you memorize which programs require Windows Ink and which require you to disable it first. And you better not have kept your computer on for more than 10 hours, otherwise if you don't restart the Wacom service in the Task Manager, then I can't promise your cursor will even show up on the correct monitor. In macOS, my biggest pain point for working with a tablet isn't even a thing. Everything works. You install the Wacom drivers and just get right to working. No messing with OS settings, no worrying about if your drivers will just die on you, and it feels really good to use. I haven't exactly measured it, and it could just be having less bloat on the laptop right now, but it did feel like the pen was more responsive than in Windows. But that's coming from someone with a $2,500 Cintiq tablet sitting on a $500 stand that weighs somewhere around 120 pounds total. What if you want to do something a bit more reasonable? Maybe even get a new standalone device out of the deal. Enter Sidecar, the ability to use any iPad or TV, wired or wirelessly, as an external monitor. But more than that, you can use it as a pen tablet too. The Apple Pencil or any other supported stylus lets you use the iPad as a full drawing tablet, even with pen pressure and everything. Not only is the iPad a very capable digital sketchbook thanks to apps like Procreate, I was able to use it as a mobile ZBrush workstation with my MacBook running ZBrush and sculpting on the iPad. The full ZBrush experience in a package small enough to fit in my laptop bag. And since ZBrush uses CPU rendering, it runs great, no complaints whatsoever. Finally, the one thing I really wanted out of my future laptop was a reality. And finally, when it comes to actually using all this, the MacBook's battery does not disappoint. It's a 100 watt-hour battery that boasts a 10 to 12 hour battery life for web browsing and watching videos, something that I proved in the real world when on my flight to visit family for the holidays. And if you need to do anything demanding, the power adapter is relatively small and charges it up nice and fast. Nothing like those massive power bricks I've been used to. And if you're really worried about battery life usage, the Activity Monitor, which is macOS's version of the Task Manager, shows a 12-hour breakdown of what programs you've been running and how much battery they've been taking, to help guide you on how to extend the battery life to be as long as possible. Overall, I've been really satisfied with this thing. It fits exactly what I needed it to do and even went beyond expectations in doing so. It's a really capable machine running a well-made OS that for once I can actually treat like a laptop. It's not a desktop replacement, so if you really have a focus on playing games on it, maybe that's not what you're looking for. But that's not what I set out to do, and if I ever change my mind, there are plenty of Thunderbolt 3 eGPU options out there that I can toss onto it. I'm in an interesting spot right now when looking out for computer hardware. For all the work I need to do as a 3D artist, things have progressed to the point where I can do any project on pretty much any computer built in the last 5 years. What really sold me on the MacBook wasn't the hardware, there's nothing special about it really other than a phenomenal trackpad and solid screen. What sold me on it was the software support. Between the OS, accessory support with things like Sidecar and the various exclusive software, it took pressure off of enough day-to-day pain points that using macOS has been a pleasure. And it's been nice to have the OS on my side for once, not feel like I'm fighting it to keep up with my demands and actually have it help with my work instead. Nothing about what I enjoyed about macOS couldn't be found on Windows if Microsoft had the interest in making it happen. Microsoft could fix Windows Ink, they could fix their abysmal color management and HDR support, they could fix their search, they could not force automatic updates that break mission critical software, they could make shadow copy good again, they could do it all, just like they also could have done it 10 years ago. The direction the OS is taking has had me considering for a while whether or not to move to Linux, and I feel macOS is a good middle ground between them that serves my needs well. And maybe once upon a time the hardware cost of Macs would have driven me away, but on modern models it's actually not too far off from building a PC with the equivalent parts anyway. So all you're really choosing is whether or not you want to run Windows or macOS. Once you throw dual booting into the mix, there's even less separating them. I would never tell someone, especially in the games industry, to not have a normal gaming desktop to do things like run Unreal and all that, but I find myself now in a position where I would really recommend having a Mac either as a personal device or for other types of media, like video editing, music creation, or just simply taking advantage of its color management to sanity check your scene's look. For non-art tasks like programming, I simply don't have the experience to truly be able to judge that. I can only speak for what I've seen and how it's been able to impact my own life and work. And in that regard, it's not only met but exceeded my expectations, and I plan on sticking with the machine and OS for the foreseeable future. If Apple one day goes into the gaming market at a competitive price, I may very well switch over entirely.